The fog clung to the docks like a reluctant ghost, thick and gray, muffling the distant cry of gulls. Waves lapped lazily against weathered pilings, their rhythm broken only by the occasional creak of a boat straining at its moorings. In the dim light of dawn, an old man hunched over a tangle of fishing nets, his calloused hands moving with mechanical precision. The air smelled of salt and damp wood, and the chills seeped through his worn oilskin coat. His face was a map of deep furrows, eyes narrowed against the mist, lips pressed into a perpetual line. No one in the small coastal town of Harbor's End remembered seeing him smile, not since the sea had taken his world away years ago. A sharp screech pierced the quiet, the grind of tires on slick gravel. The old man paused, his fingers still threaded through the net. Up on the narrow road above the docks, a small car fish-tailed, its headlights cutting wild arcs through the fog. It came to a shuddering halt just short of the guardrail, engine coughing into silence. For a moment, everything froze. The waves seemed to hold their breath. The gulls fell quiet. Then a door creaked open and a figure stumbled out, a young woman clutching her side, her breath coming in visible puffs. Her name was Elena, though he wouldn't learn that yet. She was in her mid-20s, with dark hair tied back in a hasty ponytail, wearing a paint-splattered jacket that spoke of hurried creativity. She'd been driving through the night from the city, chasing a deadline for her first solo art exhibition. A wrong turn on the winding coastal highway had led her here, to this forgotten edge of the world. Now her car, a battered hatchback loaded with canvases, sat crooked on the shoulder, one tire flat, steam rising from under the hood. She leaned against the door, scanning the empty road, her phone screen glowing futilely with no signal bars. The old man set down his net. His name was Harlan, a fisherman who'd spent 60 years wrestling with the ocean. Folks in town called him Old Salt, a nickname that carried equal parts respect and pity. He'd lost his wife, Mira, to a storm a decade back, and with her went the light in his eyes. He lived in a weathered cottage overlooking the bay, alone with his routines, mending gear, casting lines at dawn, returning with just enough catch to trade for necessities. Smiles were luxuries he couldn't afford. They belonged to a life that had slipped away like sand through his fingers. He trudged up the path from the docks, boots crunching on pebbles. The fog swirled around him, making the scene feel like a dream or a memory. As he approached, Alina straightened, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Excuse me," she called, her voice steady but edged with fatigue. "Do you know anything about cars? I think I hit a pothole back there." Harlan stopped a few feet away, taking in the scene. The deflated tire, the faint hiss from the radiator. He nodded once, wordless, and knelt by the wheel. His hands, scarred from years of ropes and hooks, inspected the damage. A nail, probably, from the road work up the hill. Without a glance at her, he stood and walked to his truck parked nearby, an ancient pickup with rusted fenders and a toolbox in the bed. He rummaged, pulling out a jack and a spare tire that looked like it had seen better days. Elena watched, unsure. "I can call for help if I get a signal," she said, holding up her phone. But Harlan was already at work, cranking the jack with deliberate turns. The car lifted slowly, the fog muting the metallic groan. Shifted her weight, glancing at the canvases visible through the back window. Swirls of color depicting stormy seas and lone figures on shores. "I'm Alina," she offered, trying to fill the silence. "I'm an artist, heading to Portville for a show, but I must have taken the wrong fork." He grunted in acknowledgement, loosening the lug nuts. The work was methodical, almost meditative. As he fitted the spare, a gust of wind cleared a patch of fog, revealing the harbor below, boats bobbing like forgotten toys, the endless gray of the sea meeting the sky. Elena shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "You live here?" she asked. Harlan paused, wiping grease on his pants. "Aye," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse. "Born here, stayed here." He didn't elaborate. The tire secured, he lowered the car and stood back, appraising his work. But the engine still wouldn't turn over. The radiator had a leak, fluid pooling on the ground. Elena sighed, rubbing her temples. "Great. I guess I'm stranded." She looked around, the isolation sinking in. No houses in sight, just the misty docks and the endless road. Harlan hesitated, glancing at the sky where the fog was beginning to lift, hints of sunrise bleeding through. He could walk away, back to his nets, his solitude. But something in her weary stance tugged at him, a faint echo of Mira's determination on stormy days. "Cottage up the hill," he muttered. Got tools there, coffee too. It wasn't an invitation so much as a statement, but Elena nodded gratefully. They drove in his truck, the car left behind for now. The ride was short, silent except for the rumble of the engine. Harlan's cottage was a squat, shingled affair perched on a bluff with a view of the bay. Inside, it was sparse. A wood stove, a table cluttered with fishing lures, walls bare except for a faded photo of a woman laughing into the wind. Elena noticed it as she sat, warming her hands around a mug of black coffee he handed her. While she waited, Harlan fetched his proper toolkit from the shed. He returned to her car alone, patching the radiator with practiced efficiency, a temporary fix, but enough to get her to town. By the time he drove back to fetch her, the sun had broken through, casting golden light on the water. Elena emerged from the cottage, looking refreshed. "I peeked at your photo," she admitted as they headed back. "She looks happy." Harlan's grip tightened on the wheel. "Mira," he said softly, "wife, gone 10 years. The words hung there simple and heavy. Elena didn't pry, but as they reached her car, she said, "Must be hard carrying that alone." He shrugged, focusing on reconnecting hoses. But as he worked, she lingered, unpacking a small sketch pad from her bag. "Mind if I draw while you fix? The light here is incredible." He glanced up surprised. "Suit yourself." She perched on a rock, pencils flying across the page, capturing the harbor, the boats, and subtly him, bent over the engine, a figure of quiet endurance. The repair took longer than expected. A stubborn clamp, a need for silence. As the morning wore on, conversation trickled out. Elena shared bits of her life, growing up in the city, chasing art despite doubters. This exhibition, her big break. "It's scary putting yourself out there," she confessed. "What if no one sees the beauty in it?" Harlan wiped his brow. "Beauty ain't always seen at first. Takes time." It was the most he'd said in months. He thought of Mira's paintings, simple watercolors of the sea she'd hung in their home, now stored away in the attic. By noon, the car hummed to life. "Whew." Elena tested the engine, relief washing over her face. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, reaching for her wallet. "Let me pay for the parts at least." He waved it off. "No need." But as she prepared to leave, she tore a page from her sketch pad. Quick rendering of the harbor with him in the foreground, his face softened by the light. "For you," she said. "A stranger's thank you." Harlan took it, his rough fingers tracing the lines. Something stirred, a memory of Mira sketching him on their boat, her laughter filling the air. For the first time in years, the corners of his mouth lifted. It was faint, almost tentative, but real, a smile given freely to this passerby who'd cracked open a door he'd long kept shut. Elena blinked, then grinned back. "There it is," she murmured. "The harbor's secret." She drove off, waving, the car disappearing into the lifting fog. Harlan stood there, holding the sketch, the warmth lingering like the sun on his skin. Days turned to weeks. Harlan returned to his routines, but something had shifted. He hung the sketch on his wall, next to Mira's photo. Townsfolk noticed subtle changes. A nod that carried warmth, a gruff morning with less edge. He even shared a catch with a neighbor, unprompted. One afternoon, package arrived at his door. No sender address, but postmarked from Portville. Inside, a framed painting. The harbor at dawn, fog swirling, and in the center, a fisherman mending nets. But his face, captured from memory, wasn't furrowed. It held that fleeting smile, illuminated by the rising sun. A note tucked in. "You owned only one smile," and gave it to a stranger. "Thank you for reminding me beauty hides in quiet places." Elena. Harlan set it on the mantel, staring for a long while. The sea outside whispered on, unchanging, but inside, a small light had returned. Kindness, he realized, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about sharing the one thing you thought you'd lost forever. In the quiet of evening, as waves crashed below, Harlan allowed himself another smile, faint but his own. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the quiet power of kindness, consider subscribing. Let's keep sharing these moments of humanity together. Kindness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet smile shared with a stranger. What's a small act that stayed with you? Share below and let's celebrate our shared humanity.